In a small town named Maplewood, where everyone knew each other by name, lived a man named David. David was a dedicated schoolteacher who dreamed of bringing positive change to his community. He worked hard every day, inspiring his students to find their voices and follow their passions. But despite his passion and dedication, it seemed like every door he tried to open would slam shut right in his face. One chilly autumn day, after a long week of teaching, he learned about an upcoming position, the head of the local community board. This was a role he had longed for, an opportunity to truly make a difference. The position came with responsibilities that would allow him to shape the future of Maplewood. David believed he had the ideas and the people's support to drive change. With a pounding heart, he decided to apply for the role, feeling a spark of hope ignite inside him. But moments later, a shadow loomed over that spark. Emily, the board's current chairwoman, didn't see things the same way. A known powerhouse in the town, Emily was used to things running her way. She had power, influence, and friends who held sway over many decisions. When David submitted his application, Emily, without hesitation, rejected it. "No way can he lead us," she scoffed at a meeting when his name was mentioned. Not because David lacked talent, but because Emily believed he was too idealistic, a dreamer with lofty ideas that might disrupt her iron grip on the board. Her words felt like daggers to David's gut. His heart sank deeper into the floor alongside his hopes. David walked home that evening reflecting on her words. They stung more than he anticipated. He thought about all those years spent nurturing his students, working with creativity and integrity. It felt so unfair that he was being judged without even being seen. As days turned to weeks, a sense of frustration brewed inside him. But one morning something shifted. He was standing in his classroom looking out at his students' eager faces. They relied on him for guidance, and that thought ignited a fire in his heart. If he gave up now, what would he teach them? That dreams were only for the powerful. No, he couldn't let that happen. That night, he decided to take action. He rallied his students, past and present, to share their stories. David told them to write letters about how they felt about their community and what changes they wished to see. Over the next few weeks, hundreds of letters poured in. He began to see the hope and belief of these young voices reflect his own. With every letter, he felt stronger. These stories weren't just about playgrounds or school lunches. They were about dreaming bigger, wanting a community where everyone could thrive. Buoyed by their support, David took another chance. He reached out to the board members who respected him and shared the letters. It made them feel like they were witnessing a wave of passion building up, and the tide was rising fast. Slowly, the tide began to shift in David's favor. Conversations that had been once deemed impossible now started to weave around a new narrative that maybe, just maybe, he was the leader they needed. People began to talk more about David's passion and the support he carried from the community. But Emily was still the wall he had to climb. One evening, motivated by their voices, David attended a community board meeting. He sat silently while others spoke, his heart pounding. When the moment finally came for him to address the room, he took a deep breath. "I know many of you have doubts about my ability to lead," he began, voice steady despite the storm within. David shared the letters one by one, reading snippets aloud. As he did, he could feel a hush descend on the room. Emily's face darkened, her confidence flickering like a dying flame. The letters painted heartfelt pictures of a community longing for a change. They were powerful, each echoing a sentiment that David hoped to bring to life. The room filled with emotion. People began to nod, tears glimmering in their eyes as they listened to the words of the children they loved. David felt their passion manifesting between them, pulling the members toward a new vision. However, Emily wasn't ready to concede. In the corner, she shifted in her seat, plotting her next move. After David finished, she rose to speak, her voice sharp and commanding. "We can't let idealism steer us," she declared, her tone dripping with skepticism. "Leadership requires experience." The tension in the room felt heavier than ever. David could see the doubt on some faces, but he knew he had to press on. With courage bubbling inside him, he shot back, and what makes experience more valuable than passion? He spoke from the heart, breaking down the walls. Each word was a blow against the negativity he felt from Emily. He invited the members to think about their own passions and what brought them to the board in the first place. But it wasn't just David's words that held the room captive. It was the energy of the community he had harnessed and the perseverance that shone in his spirit. One by one, board members began to look at each other as if seeing a spark they hadn't recognized before. It culminated in a vote. Emily was confident, but the tension was palpable. Members hesitated, torn between their loyalty to Emily and the undeniable truth of David's vision. Someone broke the silence, echoing David's sentiments. Those words began a dialogue that shifted the atmosphere. They spoke about honesty, change, and love for Maplewood. And when the vote was finally cast, shockwaves rippled through the room. "David, you have 3 votes in favor," someone said, barely able to contain their excitement. The board was divided, but the tide was turning. Emily's face became flushed with disbelief, her confidence quickly eroding. At that moment, David dared to glance at the faces of his former students and community members. They were smiling, hope gleaming in their eyes. He realized then that this was more than just a battle for leadership, it was a quest for their voices to be heard. Then came the moment he had awaited. The vote for the next chairperson will now take place, someone announced, eyes scanning the room. David's heart raced, palms sweaty, inching closer to the edge of his seat. 1, 2, 3 hands shot up, then another and another. David felt a whirlwind of emotion rise inside him, laughter and tears fighting for dominance. "Congratulations, David," the board member finally said, locking eyes with him, a hopeful smile breaking through the tension. All around him, applause erupted, filling the room with a contagious energy. David could hardly believe it. The universe, it seemed, had flipped. His dreams were now within reach. Emily, visibly shaken, stood up, trying to regain her composure. "This isn't the end, David," she said, her voice lacking its previous authority. "You'll face challenges." He met her gaze with quiet conviction. The applause continued, a voice of the community echoing the progress they all cherished. David had not just won a position, he had awakened the spirit of collaboration. He had rallied the power of dreams that filled many hearts. As the dust began to settle, David looked around the room, soaking in the moment. He saw not just support, but a community ready to embrace change together. It was never about him, it was about the voices that needed a platform. And as the days turned into weeks and the seasons changed, David poured his heart into Maplewood. He listened, he learned, and he led, always reminding himself that leadership is not simply a title, it's a continuous effort to uplift those around you. In the end, David realized his greatest victories came not just through votes or positions, but in the connections he fostered and the belief he inspired within his community. The once closed door had opened. It revealed a world of possibilities he never imagined might exist, and sometimes a spark of hope is all it takes to light the way. The board meeting room buzzed with anticipation as the clock ticked closer to noon. Outside, the sun shone bright, but inside that room the air felt thick with tension. All eyes turned toward Emily, the chairwoman, as she flipped through papers, her face betraying none of the emotion boiling beyond the surface. And then came a name that echoed through the space, setting the stage for a clash: David Morgan. "No," Emily said, cutting through the murmurs like a knife. Her voice was steady, but there was an undeniable undercurrent of dismissiveness. David sat outside the door, waiting for his pitch, his heart racing. He had prepared tirelessly, and now this moment felt crushed by the weight of a single dismissal. As Emily continued, the words felt like lead weights sinking into David's chest. A ripple of agreement washed over the board, a chorus echoing Emily's sentiment. Each nod felt like a spark vibrating in the air, and in David's mind a fire flickered to life, propelling him forward. But his heart was heavy. He had known this was a long shot. David believed in himself. He believed in a vision, a dream for a Maplewood that welcomed everyone and thrived on collaboration instead of division. Yet here he was, just a face in the crowd, one being tossed aside as if he were a mere ghost. Defeated, he turned away, heading for his car parked just down the street. Each step felt heavy, dragging him into an abyss of self-doubt. But then something inside whispered to him, nudging him to turn back. Perhaps this wasn't the end. Perhaps this was the beginning. Flashbacks rushed through him, moments spent in the classroom, children's laughter echoing in the hallways, and lively discussions about justice, fairness, and the beauty of diverse perspectives. Suddenly the fire ignited again. How could he quench it, laden by just a few words? That night, in the quiet solitude of his living room, David picked up a pen. The sheets of paper began to fill with his vision. He poured his heart onto every page, articulating a dream not just for himself, but for Maplewood, a community where old and young, dreamers and doers belonged. He wrote about more green spaces, more opportunities to engage and learn. Days turned into nights, and David gathered momentum, spurred only by the thought of those dismissive voices. He reached out to his students, their families, and other community members, sharing an idea. What if they could come together to show the board that change was not just important but necessary? Emails filled with excitement began circulating. Active parents, budding artists, and community leaders promised to attend the next board meeting. David was mesmerized by this wave of support. He could feel the unease coursing through the veins of the board as the meeting approached. On the day of the meeting, David stood ready outside the glass doors, heart pounding like a drum. A group of voices joined him, the community he had rallied mixed with enthusiasm and determination. This was it, their chance to make an impact together. As the meeting began, David felt the gravity of the moment. He swallowed hard, reminding himself why he was there, and then it happened. He was invited to speak. "Thank you for letting me share," David began, feeling the room shift under the weight of his presence. He looked at the crowd, each face reflecting the hope he felt. He shared stories of the letters he had gathered, heartfelt messages written by kids who wanted change. A park where they could play, workshops where they could learn, spaces that welcomed everyone regardless of their background. His eyes glistened with passion as he read those letters aloud. Each word was a stone cast into still water, sending ripples through the room. The board members began to feel it, the energy building, transforming. He could see the doubts that had once sat heavy on their brows begin to lift. But Emily sat stone-faced, unwilling to yield. "What you're suggesting, David, is just a pipe dream." Her tone dripped with disdain. Something shifted inside David. He had anticipated this response, but now it only served to fuel him. He didn't flinch. These aren't just children's words, they are the words of a future we can shape together. Murmurs circulated and uncertain glances were exchanged. It was a battle of ideals, a tug of war between Emily's comfort in the old ways and David's brave vision for the future. The tension pressed thick in the room. Then one board member, an elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson, broke the silence. "I came here today to see if there was a vision worth supporting," she said, her voice trembling yet resolute. "David has opened my eyes." Gasps slid through the crowd like wildfire. A sense of solidarity blossomed. David felt it lift his spirit, pulling him away from despair and toward hope. The tide continued to shift as more voices began to back him. They remembered the dreams of their childhood. They remembered their own children's dreams. Emily watched as the board started to fracture, the once solid wall she constructed slowly crumbling. David pressed on. Every major change starts with a single voice. Today we have many behind us. As the hours dripped away, the discussion turned into a vote. The atmosphere was electric, quasi-political, and filled with smiles of hopeful anticipation. Would they break the mold? Would they dare to choose him? "Let's vote," someone finally declared. Nervous silence enveloped the room, everyone holding their breath. David felt his own hand shake slightly as he raised it high, watching as a few others followed suit. He counted in his head, 1, 2, 3. Yes, hope blossomed around him. The votes started to add up. With each hand raised, David felt like a small candle flickering in the gusts of change, defiant against the overwhelming darkness. The tide visibly turned and people's enthusiasm built. 4, 5, the board member called out, and the uncertainty started to give way to joy. Emily's face contorted with disbelief that seemed so strange on her usually confident countenance. Finally, the votes reached 10. He had the majority. "David, you are our new leader," the board member announced. A roar of applause erupted, and David's heart soared higher than anything he thought possible. Tears streamed down his face, not from the joy of winning it all, but from the realization of the journey he'd taken. The night was still ahead, people standing side by side celebrating a brighter Maplewood. Voices rang out, laughter echoed, and the tightened grip of judgment shattered. Emily stood, visibly shaken. "This isn't over, David," she said, her tone edged with resentment. He met her gaze with dignity, aware of the journey ahead. "I welcome the challenges." As the room buzzed with excitement, David felt a bond forming, a link connecting each soul together. It was never just about winning for him. It was about transforming Maplewood into a place where dreams could breathe and connections could flourish. From that day forward, David Morgan led with a purpose forged by passion. He welcomed differing opinions while encouraging everyone to share their stories. They engaged in dialogue, built parks, facilitated workshops, and embraced artistic endeavors. Empowerment replaced complacency, breaking barriers one conversation at a time. With each challenge, David found himself stepping up, adapting, and growing alongside his community. It was no longer about merely winning against Emily. It became about creating a space where every voice could contribute to the future they all desired. In time, Maplewood blossomed, and in the heart of it lay the spirit of a man who refused to be silenced, who refused to let a single denial extinguish the fire of hope within him. And in that small town, his story became a testament to the truth that change often begins with a single voice, but is always strengthened by the myriad of hearts that refuse to stand alone. The room fell silent as the chairwoman's voice sliced through the air, cold and unyielding. "No." A collective gasp filled the boardroom, disbelief hanging like a cloud. David could feel every pair of eyes shift toward him, the weight of their stares mingling with the disbelief in the room. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and in an instant, it felt like his dreams were crumbling into dust. Just hours before, he had sat in his small apartment poring over notes, picturing a future where he led the community into growth and unity. He envisioned parks for children, workshops for artists, and spaces where everyone had a voice. But now Emily's words hung heavy in the air, a final verdict delivered with chilling finality. David's heart raced. He glanced at the board members, their expressions a mix of shock and hesitation. Emily was the most respected authority in town, an unyielding force with decades of experience. Who was he, a mere teacher, to stand before her? Her dismissive tone echoed in his mind, each syllable a reminder of where he stood in the uphill battle he faced. "David has great ideas," a gentle voice spoke up, breaking the tension. It was Mrs. Thompson, one of the older members, her brow furrowed with concern. "We should at least hear him out." But Emily dismissed her plea with a wave of her hand, an icy glare flickering in David's direction. "Let's face it, people," she continued, "we're not running a charity here. Leadership requires experience." Something inside David snapped. He had been a teacher long enough to recognize the voices of doubt, but also to know that every voice mattered. With a tinge of anger lighting his resolve, he stood up. "With all due respect, I believe every community deserves a leader who listens to their needs." Around the room, murmurs of agreement flickered like candle flame, small yet potent, but Emily's gaze remained unmoved, as steady as granite. In that moment, David made a decision. He wouldn't let this encounter define him. He wouldn't walk away without trying. He turned to the board members, his heart pounding. "If you won't give me your support today, I ask you to hear my vision." His words hung in the air, a challenge daring them to choose between the status quo and a future teeming with potential. But then he walked out, dejected, feeling the weight of rejection press down on him like a heavy blanket. As he reached his car, the familiar sting of disappointment threatened to swallow him whole. But as he sat there in silence, an ember of determination sparked in his chest. Was this the end? No. He would not let Emily's verdict extinguish the fire inside him. He had seen too many students rise against the odds to back down now. He envisioned people, kids, parents, seniors, who could benefit from the community he dreamed of. That night in the comfort of his living room, David took out a blank notebook. The smooth pages felt like a canvas, waiting for him to fill it with ideas. He began writing. Words flowed like water from a broken dam, ideas about parks and workshops, ways to support local artists, and programs to unite diverse voices. He poured everything he believed into those pages, channeling the hope that surged within him. With every word, he visualized a community united, where conflicts could turn into conversations, where people weren't judged by their past but welcome to contribute to a brighter future. By dawn, one thing became clear. He wasn't simply going to ask for support. He would demand it through the voices of those who believed in change. As the days turned into weeks, David started gathering support. He reached out to former students, parents, and friends, sharing his vision. He organized small gatherings in his living room, inviting people to discuss what they wanted for their community. David's enthusiasm was contagious, and slowly but surely a movement began to grow. One evening, a woman named Lisa, an artist whose work David admired, stood up and raised her hand. "Imagine if we could create art spaces for kids." The room erupted in applause, a wave of excitement surging through them. Another member, Frank, added, "What about community gardens?" Each idea spurred another, like a domino effect, as they crafted David's outline into a clear vision they could present to the board. Time slipped away, and one fateful day approached, the monthly board meeting. This time around, David was prepared. He had gathered a coalition, a tapestry of voices stitched together to demand their community's dreams be heard. As they entered the boardroom, the atmosphere felt different. Emily was already seated, confidence radiating from her as she glanced at the assembled group. The board members murmured amongst themselves, whispering about the unusual crowd surrounding David. "Let's go ahead and begin," Emily called, flipping open her binder as though nothing had changed. Yet the energy in the room had shifted. David stood up, heart racing, nerves tingling, but determined to charge ahead. "Thank you for allowing us to speak today." David faced the board with grit. He was no longer just a teacher, he was the mouthpiece of the community behind him. "You've heard my ideas before, but this time I want to share the voices of those you dismissed." He stepped aside and motioned for Lisa to come forward. She took a moment to breathe, then launched into a discussion about local art and its impact. Art is a way to communicate feelings that are often hard to express. We can create an annual festival to showcase local talent. The board members listened closely this time, the wall of skepticism starting to crack. Then it was Frank's turn. He spoke passionately about community gardens, invoking the image of families coming together, their laughter mingling with the sounds of fresh produce being swapped and shared. Each person who stepped forward brought stories to life. The air buzzed with creativity, hope, and the promise of actual change. Halfway through, Emily couldn't keep her composure any longer. "While these ideas sound lovely, we have to be realistic. This isn't just about the community's desires. There are budgets, logistics." "That's where you're wrong, Emily," David interrupted, a mix of anger and resolve surfacing in his voice. "This isn't about logistics, it's about people, about dreams." The board members exchanged glances, uncertainty beginning to swirl in their eyes. Even Emily momentarily faltered, unable to dismiss the resonance of truth in David's voice. At last, they reached the vote. Board members visibly hesitated, shifting in their seat. This sense of partnership buried deep within their hearts forced them to reconsider the walls they had built up for so long. "Let's take a vote," Emily finally said, her voice colder than before. David's heart pounded, racing against time. How many hands would be raised in favor of a new beginning? David caught his breath, one hand maybe two shot up. The dead silence in the room created an electric charge. One by one, a couple more hands reached for the air, like plants struggling towards sunlight. Hope simmered beneath the skin of every gathered soul. "Mrs. Thompson glanced at David and cautiously raised her hand. Then, with a wave of courage igniting the others, the board began to shift. Hands continued to elevate and hopes were reignited. A sense of jubilation filled the space, replacing the tensions with anticipation. "David, you'll lead this initiative," Emily finally said through gritted teeth, the reality rippling through the room with disbelief and triumph. Cheers erupted, a chorus of joy. David stood, disbelieving, filled with an elation that felt both surreal and validating. The community had rallied behind him, and together they had dismantled the barriers erected by fear and doubt. In that moment, he understood the significance of their journey. It was no longer about Emily's dismissal or his perceived inadequacies. It was about the network of resilience they had woven together, fueled by their shared desires. As the crowd started to disperse, David stepped outside, sunlight flooding his senses, clarity washing over him. This wasn't just a victory for him, it was a victory for everyone who had shown up and spoke out. In the end, Maplewood thrived, transformed by creativity, contributions, and community action they had collectively orchestrated. David learned the profound truth that strong leadership doesn't come from authority alone. It comes from the courage to unite voices, from the power to dream together, and from the passion to foster change. The chapter didn't simply end with a vote. It transformed into a living testament to how unwavering hope can ignite a community's spirit, casting aside the shadows of doubt for a brighter tomorrow. And as David watched Maplewood blossom, he couldn't help but think the real leader had been the community all along. The board meeting room was filled with tension as Emily leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, a smug smile plastered on her face. Across the room, David sat poised and anxious, waiting for the moment to present his proposal for leading the community initiative. It was an opportunity he had poured his heart into, an idea that could transform their town. But as the meeting progressed, he could sense the storm brewing in Emily's eyes. Emily's voice sliced through the murmurs of the room. David's just a teacher. David felt his stomach twist. He had built every piece of this project around inclusivity and growth, yet here she was, dismissing him without even a moment's thought. Room fell silent, the members shifting uncomfortably in their chairs, some glancing at one another as if waiting for someone to speak up against Emily's cutting words. His heart raced, a mix of anger and disbelief flooding through him. He had spent countless hours devising a plan that could bring the community together, but to Emily it seemed as though he was just a name on a page, unworthy of consideration. "I have something to say," David finally spoke, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "My ideas may come from a place of passion, but isn't that what leadership is about?" Emily let out a short, humorless laugh, her confidence a wall striking back against his words. "Passion doesn't lead a community, David." The board members looked at him, their faces unreadable. He could feel their hesitation, the weight of uncertainty resting heavy in the air. Anger surged inside him, but somewhere deep down, a flicker of hope began to ignite. Maybe this was not a battle he couldn't win. "Experience is important," David continued, "but where would we be if those in power only listened to themselves?" Emily's eyes narrowed as whispers ran through the room. Still, she leaned back unfazed, as though waiting for him to run out of steam. That's when David made a decision. He would not let her dismiss him without a fight. He gathered his notes, heart pounding. "I came here because I believe in a community that listens to everyone." With that, David left the room. He climbed into his car and gripped the steering wheel tightly, his heart racing. The day had been a defeat, but as he thought about his students, about the dreams they shared, something within him shifted. What if he wasn't just a teacher? What if he could be a catalyst for change? The words leader and teacher began to blend in his mind, and the flicker of hope began to grow. That night, David made a plan. He would gather voices. If there was one thing he had learned as a teacher, it was the power of a collective. Over the next few weeks, he reached out to parents, students, and community members, discussing their dreams for Maplewood. He organized small meetings in his living room, sharing his passion and listening to their ideas. Piece by piece, he gathered stories, the struggles and triumphs of their lives binding them together in a tapestry of hope. One parent suggested, excitement lighting her eyes. Another chimed in, what about a local art festival to showcase the talents of our kids? Day by day, the ideas started pouring in. David felt the energy building, a flood of inspiration gathering momentum. Each gathering added pieces to a greater vision, a shared dream brimming with promise. As the weeks went by, David's community began to evolve from a mere collection of individuals into a thriving collective. Soon, the time came for the board to meet again, and David knew he had to make his stand. Armed with the voices of his neighbors, he would return to the boardroom, ready to confront Emily once more. As he entered, he felt the weight of all those who believed in him. The room was filled, more than just the board members. Faces he recognized, families, friends, and even some students surrounded him, forming a supportive circle. Emily's eyes narrowed again as she surveyed the crowd, her composure cracking ever so slightly. David cleared his throat, the taste of defiance lingering as the murmurs settled. "I understand that our community has its leadership traditions, but what I've learned from all of you is that tradition does not always mean progress. Today, I stand here not just as David, the teacher." He gestured to the crowd behind him, and the energy in the room shifted. "Together, we have ideas that can reshape Maplewood, a community garden where families can grow together, an art festival that celebrates our children's creativity." Silence enveloped the room as David continued, his words passionately spilling out like a river bursting from its banks. "These initiatives matter, they reflect who we are." He watched as Emily's composure wavered, her cold exterior beginning to thaw. Resentment and disbelief danced in her eyes, but even she could not dismiss the palpable energy humming through the room. Then David gave the floor to a woman named Lisa from his support group. Her voice trembled as she stepped forward, clutching a notepad tightly. "I raised my children in this community. They deserve to have their voices heard." Her declaration ignited a swell of support, and more voices began to join the chorus. Shouted Frank, friends, parents, even youth from David's classes stood together, affirming their belief. Emily could feel the shift, but stubbornness hung around her like a heavy cloak. David took a deep breath. Experience without compassion is merely authority. A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. Emily's icy expression softened slightly. She seemed to be processing something, wavering between her old ideals of leadership and the new vision unfolding before her. "Let's take a vote," someone finally proposed. David's heart raced. This could be it. The board members exchanged glances, uncertainty swirling in the air. Emily's brow furrowed, showing she didn't like it one bit. As the members prepared to vote, David held his breath, clutching a glimmer of hope. The voices of the community had risen up with him. Could they actually do this? "All those in favor of David taking on this leadership role and implementing these community initiatives, please raise your hands," the board member announced. David watched in anticipation as hands began to rise. 1, 2, 3, and a wave of support followed. A mixture of disbelief, excitement, and trepidation coursed through him. 4, 5, 6, the board member counted, and the excitement began to reach a fever pitch. David felt the rush of adrenaline pushing him forward. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line, yet as glances shifted toward her, she reluctantly raised her hand. "I still think this is a risk," she muttered, but the board erupted into applause. Someone shouted, and David almost couldn't believe it. The joy spilled into the room, laughter mingling with the cries of jubilation, and he felt himself swept into the moment. In that whirlwind of emotion, he glanced around and caught the eye of his former students and the families that had rallied by his side. To them, this wasn't just a victory for him, it was a win for everyone who longed to be heard. As the meeting adjourned, David stepped outside, sunlight spilling over him like a warm embrace. Relief mingled with exhilaration as he breathed in the crisp air. This was only the beginning. There was so much work to be done. In the coming months, the community came alive. With funds appropriated, David led collaborative team meetings. They forged partnerships with local businesses, creating a web of engagement that blended ideas seamlessly into reality. Their dreams of a community garden and art festival would take shape, turning asphalt into vibrant, thriving spaces. With each success, David's confidence grew. People showered him with gratitude, acknowledging the transformation he had ignited among them. Emily remained a figure to be reckoned with, but even she began to admire the initiative David had brought. One afternoon, as David walked through the community garden, once a barren lot, he noticed kids laughing and digging in the dirt, adults passing around fresh vegetables. The sight ignited a warmth within him. He spotted Emily surveying the garden, an expression of reluctant pride etched on her face. She caught his eye and sauntered over, finally breaking the silence. David smiled, feeling the floodgates of connection opening. Emily nodded, a hint of admiration creeping into her features. In that moment, David realized something beautiful. Change rooted itself in collaboration, understanding, and willingness to grow. He knew he didn't have to change her mind, but he could show her a new way, one where leadership meant embracing the voices of all. As the sun began to set over Maplewood, David took a moment to reflect. It was more than just a vote. It was a community awakening, a tapestry of dreams weaved by many hands. His journey from dismissal to leadership had taken unexpected turns. Yet in the end, it was never about him. It was about their collective vision, their voices united. And as they looked out over their blooming garden, he knew they had only just begun. The seeds of hope planted in Maplewood had sprouted, and their roots ran deep, ensuring that the story of their community would continue to flourish. The room buzzed with uncertainty as David sat before the community board, a whirl of emotions swirling inside him. He had been preparing for this moment for weeks, investing countless hours mapping out his ideas and dreams for their small town. Yet there they were, sitting in judgment, and at the forefront loomed Emily, the chairwoman whose word was law. "Let's be clear," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the tension. The words landed like heavy stones, echoes resonating in the silence that followed. David's heart sank, but he refused to let the disappointment show. As Emily continued, David's mind raced. He could feel the eyes of the board members darting between the two of them. "Experience is vital," the other members nodded in agreement, too afraid to challenge the authority of the woman who had held her position for years. David's pulse quickened. He had a vision that could elevate their community, but all they saw was a teacher stepping out of line. David asked, his voice steady yet laced with urgency. Emily rolled her eyes, but he pressed on. "I may not have a title, but I have a connection with this community. I see the potential. We have to grow together." A low murmur rippled through the room, and David could see the small flickers of interest reflected in the faces of some board members. Yet Emily remained unimpressed, leaning back in her chair, radiating disbelief. "Let's be real here, David," she shot back. "This isn't a classroom. We're not here to play nice. We're here to make tough choices, and that requires experience." In that moment, something inside David clicked. He felt an insatiable fire ignite within him. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about everyone in the room who silently shared his vision. He retorted, the words spilling out. The atmosphere grew heavier as board members exchanged uncertain glances. David took a breath, feeding off their hesitation. Look, I've spent years working with children. I've seen how they can dream, how they can inspire change. Emily leaned forward, her patience wearing thin. You have just one chance to impress this board. But David felt invigorated. Then let me use this chance to share what I truly believe. He felt the eyes boring into him, kind eyes among skeptical ones. Fine, Emily sighed, rolling her eyes. David quickly laid out his ideas: community gardens brimming with vegetables, art festivals showcasing local talent, workshops where people could lead and learn from one another. He spoke with a fervor that made others lean in, the crowd becoming a living entity, mirroring his enthusiasm. As he finished, a strange silence enveloped the room, punctuated only by the sound of shuffling papers. But Emily's expression was unyielding. This is all pretty, David. David felt his heart drop. But don't you see, we can bring in funding, there are grants available. You think you can persuade the board just because you feel passionately. That's not how this works, Emily emphasized, her words like ice shards. A knot tightened in David's stomach. He had come so far, but one woman's opinion felt like a wall he could not breach. With reluctance, Emily called for a vote to reject his proposal. He stood frozen as the votes were counted. Though they leaned in Emily's favor, a part of him whispered that this was not the end. No, one board member finally spoke up, a look of hesitance mixed with conviction. The room fell silent. David felt a spark of hope, but Emily's glare shot poison darts through the atmosphere. She said, incredulous, but that one voice sparked something. Another member chimed in, sharing his own childhood dreams and experiences in the community. Maybe we need to embrace new ideas, he suggested softly. As voices began to layer, David fought to hold back his emotions. A movement was rising, small at first, but gathering strength. Emily's confidence shook as murmurs of support washed over her. Perhaps change isn't so bad, another member admitted. We've watched Maplewood get stagnant for years. David seized the moment. Let's form a committee, he proposed, sincerity shining in his eyes. One that includes diverse voices, those who care about what happens to our town. Emily's irritation deepened, yet another board member's hand shot up. Votes began to trickle in. Collective energy surged through David as hands began to rise in support of his motion. Emily snapped as her face paled. David fought the urge to grin as voices rallied. Let's vote on whether we'll allow him to gather ideas and resources, someone called out, and just like that, the tide began to turn. The members were starting to embrace David's vision, a change they hadn't dared to contemplate before. Finally came the vote, and one board member turned to David. Hands shot up like firecrackers in a dark sky, and in an instant, David felt like he had been shot out of a cannon. The tally went up, shock rippling through the room. Someone exclaimed, catharsis splashing through the air, punctuated by applause. It was surreal. David could hardly process what had just happened. Emily's expression darkening was a stark contrast to the jubilant faces surrounding him. We'll not be responsible for this, she muttered under her breath before storming out of the room, fury radiating from her departing figure. Once concluded, the reality of the moment flooded over David. He had not just won a vote, he had awakened a community. The weeks that followed were rife with energy and excitement. They brainstormed ideas at coffee shops, sent emails, and formed group chats. Over and over, David emphasized the importance of togetherness. It was exhilarating yet daunting. David found himself spiraling into a world of responsibilities he never could have anticipated, but it was thrilling to witness the community's enthusiasm. They formed committees for the garden, planned meetings to strategize on fundraising, and ideas flowed like water. Every day brought fresh inspiration, and soon, neighbors who had felt silenced began to reclaim their voices, suggested Tara, a passionate local artist, during a committee meeting. It became a gentle dance of collaboration, each idea honing into something magnificent. Word spread about the plans for the garden and the art festival, and soon local businesses expressed interest in sponsoring the events. One afternoon, as David walked through the future garden site, he was struck by how far they had come. A barren patch of land had transformed into a canvas of hope. With every planting, families bonded, laughter filled the air, and shared dreams cultivated roots. Just as they were nearing the festival, David received a call from a local newspaper, excited to feature their project. This was it, recognition in the community. David could almost taste the excitement on his tongue, yet there was always the shadow of Emily looming. He occasionally saw her at other board meetings, the resentment painted across her face. Still, David maintained a sense of grace. He would never engage in battle. Instead, he focused on the community. One evening, the festival finally dawned. David stood by the entrance, greeting families as they streamed in, excitement shimmering in the air. The community garden flourished, children running through the pathways of greens and colors. Talented performers showcased their art on stage, their dreams shimmering like stars. Families swept through the booths, exchanging produce, sharing recipes, and communicating in ways they never had before. It was everything David had envisioned and more. As the sun began to set, casting golden rays across the garden, David stood back and took a deep breath. Every smile he saw, every laugh he heard, washed away the doubts he had once carried. Then he spotted Emily standing at the edge of the festival, watching with a strangely mixed expression. At first, doubt flickered in her eyes, and then it transformed, though whether into begrudging admiration or respect, David couldn't tell. He walked over to her, heart pounding like a drum. "Emily, I never meant to challenge your authority." She looked away, momentarily silent. "I didn't think this would actually work," she finally admitted, her posture shifting. "We all have things to learn," David replied with sincerity. "This is bigger than just me or you, it's about the community." For the first time, he saw a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. "Maybe there's room for both of us to lead in different ways," she offered, surprising them both. "Absolutely," David replied, extending a hand. With that, a spark ignited, bringing clarity and resolution. A friendship forged from their differences began to unfold. From then on, they collaborated on initiatives, shared responsibilities, and opened the door to even more voices willing to join in. Maplewood blossomed into a beacon of transformation, a model for collaboration, and David found himself more empowered than ever. Each moment spent nurturing that community felt like magic. They faced challenges together, cheered successes, and found ways to balance their differences. Through it all, David had learned a crucial lesson. Standing up for one's beliefs could weave change if fueled by genuine connection and collaboration. As seasons changed, the unity of the community grew stronger, turned into something palpable and lasting. Each effort to create inclusion radiated outward, reminding him that he had not only changed a board meeting but shifted the very heart of a community, creating a ripple effect that they could barely fathom. And it all began with a simple refusal, a denial that had transformed into an opportunity, one that ignited a journey of courage, resilience, and leadership, bound by the spirit of collaboration. Emily barked, her voice cutting through the murmurs in the boardroom like a knife. The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. Outside, the sun beamed down on a vibrant Maplewood, but inside this room, a storm of disbelief brewed. David sat in the back, heart pounding wildly. He had worked tirelessly to prepare his proposal, pouring every ounce of energy into crafting a vision for the community he loved. Yet here he was, treated as if he were a child playing at being an adult. Emily, the long-standing chair of the board, had made her ruling with an icy dismissal that sent shockwaves through the room. Around the table, the other board members shifted in their seats, some looking nervous, others nodding in reluctant agreement. David felt like a lone warrior facing an army, and the more he listened, the more doubt crept into his mind. Who was he kidding? He was just a teacher with dreams. As Emily continued her tirade, David's heart sank further. "We need someone with experience," she said, her tone condescending. The room erupted in murmurs of agreement, drowning David in the denial he desperately sought to overcome. Taking a deep breath, he gathered his resolve. He had envisioned change. He had seen how a fresh perspective could breathe life into the community. With every ounce of his being, he wanted to prove Emily wrong. Emily's brows arched, clearly unimpressed. Something inside him snapped. "I know that leadership means listening." Could see a flicker of interest in a few of the board members, but Emily remained unyielding, her eyes narrowed like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. She waved her hand dismissively. The board members shuffled their papers, pretending to focus on the agenda, but David's mind raced with frustration. He had to do something, and the realization hit him like a freight train. If he couldn't show them his worth today, he'd never get another chance. Without thinking, David rose to his feet. "Then let me present my ideas." He sensed the gasps that followed, but he didn't waver. It was as though a primal instinct had kicked in. He would no longer be silenced. As he stepped out of the boardroom, the weight of rejection pressed heavily on his shoulders. He paced outside, his heart racing. He muttered to himself. He had poured his heart into this initiative, only to feel it spurned on the first try. But deep down, a flicker of determination ignited. This wasn't over, not yet. At home, David pulled out his notebook filled with sketches of his ideas, a community garden and arts festival, workshops that would empower everyone to share their unique talents. Each idea represented a dream, not just his, but shared among families, children, artists, and anyone who longed for a sense of belonging. With renewed vigor, he decided to take action. He reached out to friends, former students, and anyone who would listen to his vision. "What if we come together as a community?" he urged during small gatherings in his living room. The first few meetings were small, just a handful of people filling the chairs, but as he spoke, David saw the spark ignite in their eyes. People started to share their dreams and aspirations. Ideas flowed freely, building on one another, creating a tapestry of hope. One parent suggested a community garden, another proposed an arts festival to showcase local talent. David listened attentively, jotting down every idea, feeling the momentum build. Within weeks, word began to spread and more people filtered in. They began to realize they could reclaim their voice, and he was just the catalyst they needed. As the new month approached, David announced, "We need to take this to the board." The room erupted in applause, excitement bubbling over like a pot about to boil. They could feel a wave of change building, rolling over them with powerful energy. The day arrived for the next board meeting, and it was different this time. David stood at the front, a small army of support behind him. It felt surreal to see familiar faces, all united for a common goal. Emily's expression transformed from indifference to disbelief as she spotted the crowd streaming in. "We're here to share our voices for our community," David began, his heart racing. He could feel the gravity in the air shift as the room filled with passionate voices. One after another, they shared their dreams. Tara spoke passionately about art programs for kids. Frank discussed the benefits of a community garden, and Lisa highlighted the importance of being inclusive and welcoming. David watched as he had once imagined. Each voice shone a light on the richness of their shared dreams. It wasn't just him anymore. It was about the lives they could change together. But just as the tide was rising, Emily shot up from her seat, her frustration palpable. She snapped, "You think a few feel-good ideas can magically change everything?" David felt adrenaline surge within him. "No, Emily, it's not. It's reality, but it can be our reality if we allow it to be. Imagine the long-term benefits for our community." A murmur spread through the board. Some members were beginning to be persuaded by the sheer hope emanating from the crowd. But Emily wasn't about to back down. "If we're going to play this game, let's take it to a vote," she said, crossing her arms defiantly. David's heart raced again. It was now or never. "Fine, let's take a vote." After a tense moment, the board began to tally votes. David held his breath, glancing at his supporters who were all watching him intently. When the results came in, shock echoed through the room. There was a majority in favor of allowing the committee to proceed with their plan. Cheers erupted, drowning out Emily's shocked response. She exclaimed, frustration bubbling over. David felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had done it together, they had done it. But even amidst the triumph, he noticed Emily hanging back, her face a mix of anger and confusion. In the weeks that followed, the projects began to gain pace. The community garden was set to break ground, and the arts festival was in full swing, with families excitedly participating. David often facilitated meetings, but now he also worked alongside his community, feeling truly integrated into every step. He thrived on the camaraderie. Every voice felt valued, every idea, no matter how small, led to tangible change. The festival brought them together, an event highlighting everything from local crafts to music. But through it all, David couldn't shake the image of Emily. She remained a shadow, watching from the sidelines, and he struggled with the question, could they ever bridge this gap? Then came the day of the festival, the air electric with anticipation. Booths lined the street, bursting with colors and laughter. The community came alive, reflecting the passion and effort invested. Yet amidst the joy, David noticed Emily lingering on the sidelines, still distanced. Fueled by courage, David approached her. He asked, trying to keep the mood light. Her gaze narrowed, but there was an unexpected softness in her tone. "I came to see if any of this was real," she admitted, looking around at the bustling activity. "It is," David replied earnestly. "We made this happen. It's what happens when you give people a chance." Emily sighed, her stance softening. David nodded, feeling a sense of understanding blossom between them. "It doesn't have to be a battle for leadership. We can collaborate." A smile flickered across Emily's face, surprising him. From that moment on, an unexpected partnership blossomed. They learned to combine their strengths, leading initiatives together, forging a collective vision that combined traditional wisdom with new perspectives. As seasons changed and the community flourished, David found himself loving every moment spent transforming Maplewood. He felt empowered each day, turning dreams into realities alongside those who once doubted him. The board not only evolved, but it became a living example of shared leadership. Emily's initial rejection had been a catalyst for connection instead of division. Through laughter and tears, David reflected on how far they had come. What began as a single refusal became the foundation for dialogue, collaboration, and growth. Together, they had forged a new path, breathing life into the very heart of Maplewood. David knew this was just the beginning, a tale worth sharing, proving that even rejection could turn into opportunity if only they dreamed together. And as they watched the sunset paint the sky, he realized they had done what was once thought impossible. They had united a community, discovering that leaders could rise not just from authority, but from understanding and connection. The tension in the boardroom was palpable, a thick fog of uncertainty that seemed to hover above the table. Emily, the chairwoman, tapped her pen rhythmically against her notepad, her expression a mask of disinterest. David sat across from her, heart pounding against his chest, waiting for the moment that could change everything. "I can't support David's application," she declared, the words slicing through the air like a hot knife. Gasps rippled through the audience, and David felt the heat rise in his cheeks. In that moment, everything he had dreamed of came crashing down, his plans for the community, his hopes of making a difference, all dismissed in one sweeping statement. He had spent countless hours preparing for this. Ideally, he imagined a community strengthened by cooperation and creativity. He envisioned events that would inspire conversation, appreciation, and unity. But as Emily continued to talk, he could feel his vision slipping away. He does not have the experience we need, she went on, her tone all too certain. Leadership requires a steady hand. David clenched his fists under the table, fighting back frustration. She had no idea, but she wasn't the only one who had a say in this. All due respect, Emily, he interjected, trying to keep his voice steady. Leadership isn't simply about experience. The room fell silent. Some members of the board exchanged glances, surprise flickering in their eyes. Feeling a surge of courage, David pressed on. I believe in this community, and I believe that fresh ideas can breathe new life into it. Emily's posture stiffened. You think a few words will convince this board to trust you? Experience shows us what works. His heart raced. This wasn't a gamble, it was a chance for growth. But what if our community is stagnating because we're afraid to take risks? People want to feel heard. David, you're passionate, but passion doesn't solve problems. You need to show us something tangible. Emily shot back, her eyes narrowing. Before he could respond, she called for a vote to reject his proposal. The board members shifted uncomfortably, but the nods of agreement for Emily's position echoed too loudly for David. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of rejection settle like a stone in his stomach. As the board adjourned, he stepped outside, barely able to process what had just happened. The cool air hit his face, snapping him out of the daze. Rejection wasn't the end, it was simply a detour one he had to navigate. He returned home that evening with determination coursing through him. Ideas flooded his mind, his notebook filled with potential solutions he needed to share. But first, he needed support. That night, he wrote a message to friends and acquaintances. If you believe in a better Maplewood, come join me. Over the next few weeks, word of mouth exploded. People who shared a common vision began to rally around him. One by one, they showed up at his small gatherings, friends, parents, former students sharing their ideas. They brainstormed and pieced together a vision for Maplewood that was vibrant and full of energy. Why not have a community garden? Suggested Tara, a mother of two who had long felt unheard. David exclaimed, jotting it down. The ideas flowed like a river, each person adding their flavor, building a sense of ownership. Days turned into weeks, and soon David could feel a movement bubbling up, gathering strength like a wave ready to crash onto shore. They wouldn't just dream, they would act. He asked the group one evening, a mix of excitement and nerves swirling in his gut. Echoed through the room, enthusiasm igniting their spirits. The day of the meeting arrived, and David stood at the front, heart hammering, flanked by supporters. As they entered, Emily was already seated, her expression stoic, but he sensed a flicker of recognition in her eyes as she glanced at the growing crowd behind him. Today we're here to present a proposal, not just one man's plan, but a collection of voices from our community, David began, feeling the energy in the room swell. He gestured to the members of his group, inviting them to speak. One by one, they shared their ideas, the community garden, the arts festival, workshops to empower local talent. Each voice added depth to the collective vision that Anna and others had sparked. The atmosphere shifted palpably. David could see that Emily was beginning to feel the concern of the rest of the board. She leaned forward, her defenses vulnerable. Listen, I respect your passion, I really do, Emily finally said, her voice rippling with tension. But passion doesn't build community. The room fell silent, and David seized the moment. That's exactly what we are presenting, real ideas that the community backs. Emily crossed her arms defiantly, objection dancing in her eyes. If the board agrees, then yes, David replied, heart racing. The tension in the air was electric, each breath heavier than the last. They took the vote, the murmurs echoing in the silence. A board member asked. Nervous anticipation hung thick as hands began to rise 1, 2, 3 until the count reached 8, clear majority. Cheers erupted, the sound reverberating through the room, drowning out Emily's incredulous silence. Congratulations, David, one board member grinned, shaking his hand. But Emily's face darkened, anger flashing across her features. She stood, her fingers trembling slightly. This isn't over, David. I wouldn't have it any other way, he replied, a smile creeping onto his face. Hope began to blossom in the hearts of those around him. This was just the beginning. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Planning meetings filled the calendar, and David found himself in the center of it, all ideas streaming in like a powerful current. He felt revitalized, the weight of doubt pulling back like a receding tide. As they broke ground on the community garden, the air hummed with excitement. Families came together, hoeing, planting, and sharing laughter. It wasn't just dirt that was being turned, hearts were mending, bonds were forming. But through it all, Emily lingered on the outskirts, watching with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. The festival drew closer, excitement echoing in every corner. David encouraged everyone during one of their final planning sessions. Yet as he prepared for the big day, he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed space to talk to Emily. Approaching her during a quiet moment, David found himself hoping for a genuine conversation. Emily, he began tentatively, I know you've had your doubts and you may still have them. She hesitated, looking at the ground before meeting his eyes. I'll admit, what I underestimated was the sheer strength of community when united. A sincere smile broke across his face. As long as we keep listening and learning, it can last as long as we want it to. He could see a glimmer of understanding in her expression, something that hadn't been there before. Maybe, she said softly, I could help with my experience. David felt a warmth bloom in his chest. I'd love that. The day of the festival finally arrived, and it was as if the entire town had gathered to celebrate together. Merchants lined the street, colorful booths bursting with crafts and fresh produce. The laughter of children resonated as they painted and played. David felt an overwhelming rush of joy as he moved through the crowd. It was magical, a sense of camaraderie wrapping around him like a warm embrace. The community had come together not just for a festival, but to celebrate change and empowerment. Then, amidst the vibrant chaos, he spotted Emily, interacting with families and helping direct traffic. She was no longer a figure of authority standing apart. She was part of it, engaging with the joy around her. As the sun began to set, illuminating the festival in a warm golden glow, David walked up to her. Looks like you've embraced the spirit of the day, he remarked, amusement dancing in his eyes. Emily laughed, a sound David had never heard before, a release of pressure, a breath of joy. I may have underestimated the power of community, she admitted. Together we can build on this, David replied, feeling the possibility of partnership expand. That night, as the events unfolded around him, he took a moment to reflect. What began as a single denial had transformed into something vibrant and beautiful. The energy of collaboration pulsed through the air, and as families danced under twinkling lights, conversations flowed seamlessly, connection blossomed like flowers. David realized that they were creating something that would last beyond the festival, a legacy rooted in togetherness. Standing beside Emily, David understood that leadership wasn't just a title, it was a collective journey. And sometimes, those who seemed the most resistant could become the strongest allies when given a chance to connect. As the stars dotted the evening sky, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that this was only the beginning of a new chapter for Maplewood, a chapter built on resilience, hope, and unwavering belief in community. It happened on a Thursday, a day that felt like any other until the moment it changed everything. In the heart of Maplewood, David waited nervously outside the boardroom, his hands clammy against the stack of papers he had prepared. This was it, the opportunity to put his vision for the community into motion. He could feel electricity pulsing through his veins, a mix of fear and excitement. As he waited, he heard the rustling of chairs, the low hum of chatter spilling from the room. The board had convened, and within those walls sat some of the most influential people in town. Moments later, the heavy door swung open, and Emily, the chairwoman with a reputation for being a hardliner, emerged. David, we're ready for you, she said, her tone clipped as if she had been dreading this moment. He entered the room, trying to center himself, but the sight of the board members sitting in judgment sent his stomach into knots. David cleared his throat and launched into his presentation, laying out his plans for a community garden, an arts festival, and programs to empower local creators. He spoke with passion, picturing families coming together and kids laughing, but as he spoke, he caught Emily's skeptical eye. When David finished, he scanned the room. There was silence, a tension hanging in the air so thick he could almost feel it pressing down on him. Emily adjusted her glasses and leaned forward, her expression unreadable. Interesting ideas, David, she began, her voice steady and authoritative. But let's be honest, where's the proof that any of this can work? Promotional events like these don't just happen. David felt the color drain from his face. But I'm not asking you to take a gamble on a whim. I have the community's support. Emily's expression hardened. With all due respect, those are just feelings. As she continued to pick apart his proposal, David's heart crashed against his chest. He had prepared for scrutiny, but this felt like a personal attack. He could see the board members shifting uncomfortably, some nodding in agreement with Emily. The tide was turning against him. I have what it takes, he implored. I have ideas that can unite this community. Emily leaned back, arms crossed like a fortress. You can't just throw ideas at the wall and see what sticks. The others murmured, and David felt anger bubbling within him. This wasn't just about him, it was about the community that deserved a voice. Let's take a vote, he demanded suddenly, surprised by his own determination. Emily looked around the table and the board members exchanged glances. After a moment, she sighed, her eyes narrowing. The board took a vote, and as the numbers were counted, David held his breath. The question hung in the air, one hand raised tentatively, then another and another. Victory surged through him, but Emily's hand stayed firmly down. This is foolish, she scoffed, but the tide was rising. More hands were going up, and as the final count was tallied, the board members looked at one another with disbelief. David, you have majority support, the board member announced, and thunderous applause erupted around the room. As the celebration began, a shadow fell upon David's joy. Emily's expression was one of simmering fury. This doesn't mean it will work, she snapped, her voice sharp. David met her gaze, determination solidifying within him. Then let's work together to make it succeed. And just like that, the first chapter of the struggle had been written. The next weeks were a whirlwind. David dove into the work, fueled by the community's passion and an insatiable drive. With each meeting, as plans solidified, a sense of purpose enveloped him. As they broke ground on the community garden, families gathered, hoeing, planting, and sharing laughter. The soil became rich not just with crops but with connections. Yet amid this joyful transformation, Emily remained a thorn in his side, watching from the sidelines, her presence heavy with skepticism. She asked one afternoon, catching him as he inspected the garden. David tried to keep his tone light. "Doubt is easy, Emily. Change is hard." She huffed, obviously unconvinced. "Just wait, something will go wrong." Days turned into weeks, and before long the festival loomed large on the horizon. Posters covered the town, excitement buzzing through the community. But in the back of David's mind, Emily's doubts echoed relentlessly. The issues were looming like storm clouds, threatening to upset their success. On the evening of the festival, David stood at the entrance, a sea of jubilant faces pouring in. Laughter floated through the air like music. The art booths sparkled under the twinkling lights, and children dashed between them, their energy contagious. It was everything he had dreamed of, yet amidst the joy, the ground underfoot felt shaky. He scanned the crowd and spotted Emily conversing with other board members, her expression unreadable. Anxiety nagged at David. Halfway through the event, disaster struck. A sudden storm rolled in, dark clouds blotting out the sun, heavy rain pouring down. Panic spread through the attendees, laughter turning to shouts as people scrambled for shelter. David shouted, trying to regain control. The festival, which had been thriving just moments before, was turning chaotic. Emily stood by, arms crossed, casting disbelieving glances at the unfolding chaos. As they rushed to gather people under the tent, David felt his heart racing. What had started as a celebration was quickly spiraling into a nightmare. Emily called out over the chaos, her voice ringing with a mixture of bitterness and truth. Ignoring her, David focused on helping families find safety. He could feel the pressure of the moment weighing down on him. Every laugh he had heard just moments ago now felt like a distant memory, replaced by the sound of raindrops hammering down on the tent. As people scurried underneath, David caught sight of Tara, her face flush with panic. She asked desperately, clutching her child close. "We keep it together. This is just a bump in the road," he said, trying to radiate calm, but he could see doubt flicker in her eyes. Minutes passed and the rain showed no sign of stopping. David's heart sank. This was his moment, and it was drowning before his eyes. He looked at Emily, who remained a sentinel, judging, and the anger bubbled below the surface. "Don't just stand there," he shouted, breaking his calm facade. For the first time, he saw vulnerability seep into her expression. Embers of doubt and hesitation flickered in her gaze. She snapped back. "Join me, help rally people back to safety." In that moment of crisis, a shift occurred. Maybe it was the raw intensity of urgency, or perhaps it was something deeper. Emily pulled her coat tighter around her and nodded slowly. With newfound purpose, they worked together, urging families to keep calm, guiding them to safety, coordinating with volunteers to create a makeshift shelter. Slowly but surely, the panic began to ease. And as they found their rhythm, David realized he was no longer just leading the effort. He was forging an unexpected partnership with Emily. The rain poured around them as they shuttled people under the shield of the tents. Despite the storm raging above, a raw determination ignited within him. He had pushed through the wall that had divided them. Maybe there was a way to unite experience and passion after all. But just as they began to feel a sense of accomplishment, lightning split the sky and thunder crashed. It was louder than the chaos that surrounded them. David's heart raced as reality hit him. The storm wasn't just a challenge, it was a test of their resolve and adaptability. They gathered everyone under the central tent, but the storm showed no signs of letting up. David looked at Emily, their previous tension momentarily replaced by a flicker of teamwork. He asked, urgency lacing his voice. Emily swallowed hard, her usual bravado faltering for a moment. "We need to calm everyone down. We can't let this spiral. We can make it through this as a team," she replied. But just then a panicked shout broke through the noise. "There's water pooling near the back." The words sent a jolt through David. His heart dropped. If they didn't act fast, their hard work could wash away along with their dreams for Maplewood. As they rushed to shore up barriers, David caught Emily's eye, their unspoken connection sharpening into focus. They had to work together as one to make it through this, to save what they had built. With adrenaline coursing through his veins, David felt an overwhelming push to lead, to be that voice of reason amidst the storm. But even as they fought against the elements, the question lingered in the air. Would they survive this ordeal not only as a team, but as allies? And in that moment, standing in the eye of the storm with doubt swirling around them, David knew their true test was just beginning. The rain pounded down like a battle drum, echoing a singular truth. They were at a turning point in everything. Their dreams, their ambitions, and their community was at stake.